Hello, I'm Michael Hainsworth. Bill C-282 has passed, and you might be forgiven if it passed you over. Chances are you didn't know about it because you're not a farmer or a trade lawyer. The bill prohibits the Government of Canada from negotiating any trade agreement that increases foreign access to Canada's supply-managed agriculture sector. Farmers love it, but trade lawyers hate it. Joining us is Bill Robson. He is the CEO of the C.B. Howe Institute. He is also co-author of a letter to Canadian senators titled, "Don't Let the Dairy Lobby Win This Fight." Also joining us, Martha Hall Findlay, formerly the president and CEO of the Canada West Foundation, the chief sustainability officer at Suncor, and as her LinkedIn profile states, retired, but now considering options. Bill, Martha, thank you for joining us.
A pleasure.
Great to be here.
Martha, I understand there's congratulations in order, if for no other reason, based upon where we find you here at this precise moment.
Well, thank you. Not sure if that's the options that I was considering that has now been formalized, which is the new role as director of the School of Policy at U of C. But you might be referring to the Queen's Jubilee Medal too, which let's just lump it all in.
I've got a sense, Martha, and congratulations, by the way. I have a sense of your position on Bill's position on C-282. Where do you stand?
Well, needless to say, Bill and I agree, I think, vehemently on this, but so do many others who understand the implications. Just for background, I did a fair bit of work on supply management when I was actually an executive fellow at the School of Public Policy in its earlier years. We continued some of that work at the Canada West Foundation, really to update some of the numbers. When you did your introduction and said farmers love it, actually the majority of farmers in Canada don't love it. It's really just available to the dairy, poultry, and egg sectors. And when you talk about number of farmers, and we'll get into it, but that actually represents a very small number of people in Canada now. And the farmers who don't support supply management are pretty much everybody else, because most of our agricultural producers sell abroad. They benefit from trade. As Canadians, we sell a lot of stuff abroad. We're a small, open, and very heavily trading country. And so we're dependent on international trade. The dairy and poultry and egg farmers do not trade, and because of the supply management system that they benefit from, we go to every trade negotiation with one arm tied behind our backs. That actually hurts an awful lot of farmers in Canada, as well as manufacturers, as well as pretty much anybody who actually engages in trade, both whether you're bringing products in for manufacture or for whatever, or if you're selling. So it's actually a very small number of people in Canada who now benefit from this system.
Maybe I'll just jump right in and say that, yes, vehement agreement about the fact that supply management is a bad system. It's a cartel. It raises the price of basic groceries. And so it's regressive on top of really distorting the market. But you can also come at this the other way and just expand the point that Martha was making to ask the question, what if we decided that we were going to extend this kind of protection to other sectors as well, outside agriculture? What if we decided that we were going to make it illegal for the government to ever offer a trade concession in automobiles or in forest products or in anything else? I mean, you could imagine at the limit are ruling every sector that we like to protect off limits in trade negotiations, and then who would ever negotiate anything with us? We would have no hands available to deal with it. So in addition to it being a problem that we protect the market for dairy products, particularly in poultry and eggs, the way that we do, the precedent that this bill would set if it comes out of the Senate would be terrible, because you might well have other sectors that would say, well, if them, then why not us? And you'd end up with a situation where it was completely impossible for us to ever enter into trade negotiations, ever to win any concessions from anybody else. And that'd just be a crazy situation to put ourselves in.
And it's probably not a great example, but it's a little bit like saying we're going to charge a carbon price on everything except heating oil for a couple of provinces. And that clearly has gotten the current government into hot water, pardoning the pun. And I think rightly so. It is a great example of how it doesn't work in Canada to say yes to one group of people, yes to one sector, no to another, show favoritism to one or another. And dare I say, this particular sector, dairy, poultry, and eggs, is now it now comprises a very small people, a very very small number of very wealthy dairy, poultry, and egg producers.
But there is a big difference between a car and cheese. Senator Amina Gerba urged her Red Chamber colleagues to greenlight the bill in part on the grounds that it helped secure the supply chain at a time when the pandemic had showed us just how critical it is that our food be homegrown.
Well, I know, Mark, that
you go, Bill.
yeah. No, this argument in favor of self-sufficiency is very seductive. Unfortunately, it just seems like common sense. We learned during the pandemic that we couldn't rely on the Chinese to provide us with masks. We learned that we had trouble with vaccines. We learned that we had trouble with all kinds of things. Does that mean that we're now going to try and supply all of our domestic needs right across the board? We won't have very many bananas to eat if we take that approach. And since you need to import in order to export, trade doesn't work only one way. It's very literally the case that people have to have the Canadian dollars to buy from us. If we're not importing, we're not going to be able to export either. So it's a real recipe for going down this autarkic road. And I just don't see a national security case for cheese. I think the price that we pay day in, day out to have that kind of protection is way out of proportion to any benefit there could be. The last time I looked, 4 liters of milk was $1 more expensive on average than it is in the United States. And that's not a small amount, as everybody knows. You go shopping around, if you could find it for, $4.50, $4.60, very good for you. Most times people are paying a lot more than that. And it's also choking off our cheese industry. We do have some good artisanal cheeses in Canada, and I don't mean to run it down, but when you compare what's available, it's funny to say this, even in the United States, I think a lot of defenders of supply management suppose that all that you can ever get in the United States is like plastic wrapped bog standard cheddar cheese. There's a phenomenal artisanal cheese industry in the United States, as there is in New Zealand, as there is in Europe. And we could be doing those things too on a much larger scale if we didn't wall our market off the way that we do and make the raw material for making cheese so expensive. If we want more cheese in Canada, we should make the milk more available, not less.
And on the artisanal cheese and Quebec, Nova Scotia, there's some fantastic, like global, worldwide medal winners, right? It's not just the price of the inputs, which is way higher than any of the competitors. You can't sell that stuff in France because France will say, too bad, so sad. You have supply management. We're not trading with you. You can't, you won't let any of our stuff in to your country, or very, very little. Why would we let you bring your stuff into our country and to compete with us when you have such a massively subsidized domestic system? There are so many problems with this, Michael. It's the trade piece. It's the fact that we're supporting a very small number of very wealthy people. It's the fact that right now we're listening to real concerns about grocery prices. To watch the CEOs of the major grocery retailers go through what appeared to be like a perp walk with the federal government telling them you have to reduce prices, and yet say absolutely nothing about what all reports have found, hundreds of dollars for the average family extra to pay for basic foodstuffs because of supply management. It makes no sense.
If I can just jump in, sorry, Martha and Michael, but while we're looking at different angles of this problem, there's one that I think deserves more attention than it usually gets, and that is the fact that these quotas, the right that the dairy producers and the egg farmers and the poultry producers have to produce, because it's a cartel, that right is worth money. There's a lot of money at stake here now that we've had this system in place for so long. The last I checked, the value of a quota, just the right to produce, was over $40 billion. Now, you think about a situation where somebody wants to get into the business. Maybe you, because you're tired of your work as a broadcaster and you'd like to get some dirt under your fingernails, you've decided that you'd like to be a dairy farmer. One of the absolute biggest obstacles that you will have to getting into the business is to buy that quota. And what you might do is you might go to the bank. Farm Credit Canada, a Crown lender, lends against this stuff. So by perpetuating the system for as long as we have, we've built up this very large value. It's a totally artificial thing, right? Like, it's not like a house or a tractor or livestock or anything. It's just this arbitrary thing that gives you the right to produce that's now worth more than $40 billion. And lenders have lent against that. And the longer we keep the system in place, the harder it is going to be to undo that because it's going to cost a lot of money. And you could, I'm not saying this would happen, but if you were to cancel it all of a sudden, you'd have a bit of a financial problem on your hands with the people who lent against it. Suddenly, their collateral is worth a lot less. So we really ought not to be cementing the system further in place. We ought to be looking for ways out of it.
There has been an environmental argument being made that supply management ensures the shortest distance between the producer and the consumer of the product. As we try to focus more on our carbon footprint, this looks like part of that solution, in addition to the ensuring that Canadians have milk when Canadians need it, regardless as to whether or not we're in a pandemic or in any other supply crunch.
Martha, you were about to come into it. Yeah.
I do want to come back to the how do we get out of this, because we can't keep perpetuating it. Too many people are hurt by it, and far too few people are benefiting massively from it. But that argument about the buying local, I love it. It sounds so good, right? I grew up on, part of my growing up on an apple farm in Ontario. It sounds wonderful. But if you actually drill down, and believe me, I spent years now drilling down into carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprint, a watermelon that gets grown in Ontario and put on a small truck and goes to the grocery store probably has way more emissions per watermelon than a whole truckload or a container full from Mexico per watermelon. That argument it's a little bit like the dairy farmers often use, well, the system protects the family farm, right? It sounds lovely, doesn't it? It's absolutely false. It's just plain wrong. And indeed, some of the work that we did on comparing supply managed farms as opposed to comparing them with beef, potato, other variety of the agricultural sectors in Canada. Over the course of time, over the last 20 years, there are fewer. The number of dairy farms has reduced far more in the supply managed sectors than in the non-supply managed sectors. So it's not protecting the family farm. Indeed, partly because of the value of quota that Bill was just talking about, it's becoming more the purview of a small number of big operators who are making an awful lot of money. And so I appreciate the argument. I'm an environmentalist, as you can imagine. That's been my job for quite a few years to work on this. That argument simply doesn't apply. You have to, it's a little bit like, electric vehicles. You can't assume that the electricity is coming from a green electricity source. You can't assume that the battery manufacturing didn't produce any emissions, or the steel, or the whatever. You have to look at the full life cycle. So whenever somebody says, oh, it's fewer emissions because it happens to be close by, that's a spurious argument. I do want to go into a little bit the commentary about quota and the cost, and one of the first pieces that I worked on 2011, I guess, Bill, 2011, 2012.
Been at it for a while.
Was to compare what Australia did. Now, Australia, 25 years ago, had a similar system. It had supply management. It also had a pretty controlled economy in a lot of other ways. And a decision was made that if it's going to compete in the growing Asian world, it needed to be competitive. And one of the things they realized was New Zealand was starting to sell all sorts of dairy products. For Australia to compete, they needed to get rid of supply management for the same reason no one would trade with them, right, on these issues. Just exactly what this bill does the opposite of doing, is letting us trade. And the Australian system was really quite brilliant. It was done over 25 years. It was done using the extra money that producers were getting, because it's a huge premium we pay for dairy products and eggs and chicken, taking some of that premium, not all, some of it, to pay into a fund that over the years was used to actually pay for the quota. It's frankly genius, brilliant in its simplicity. We've recommended it to the Canadian governments. Frankly, we've now recommended it to a couple of different Canadian governments. But politically, it's very difficult.
I do want to just, I agree totally with what Martha said. There are ways that you can transition out of it. It does involve spending some money, but you can have a very long transition period. And at the end of it, you'll be done with it. And so I would be happy to see us get into something that did the sort of thing that Martha's talking about over 10 years, even over 20 years.
Yeah.
Because once people see what's coming, then they'll start to make the adjustments. And I'm convinced that Canada would be, like many of the Northern European countries are, as well as Australia and New Zealand, very competitive in dairy products. I think we'd surprise ourselves at how good we are. I do want to go back, though, to the argument about, forcing everybody to buy local. It's one thing to do it voluntarily. It often makes sense. Lots of local products. It is a shorter transportation. There's less possibility of the produce getting bruised and all the rest of it. However, it's the same argument you would hear for autarky and all kinds of things. I mean, if we did our own surgery, we'd save ourselves the greenhouse gas emissions of being in the ambulance going to the hospital. But the results probably wouldn't be all that good if we made our own clothing. I mean, just think of the challenge of growing all our own food. I mean, why would you even go across the street to a farmer or across town to a farmer if the logic is we should do it all ourselves? Then everything you should grow should be right in your own house. So it's a seductive argument again, but I think it's nonsense. If it makes sense, by all means, buy local, and many of us do. But don't have the government force us to do it when that means that people, and again, I'm just going to go back to the point made right at the outset, higher grocery prices are regressive. They hurt lower income people more, and it's a terrible way to run a system. Much better to finance. Martha mentioned what the Australians did, where you had a premium on the milk prices. It's very attractive to kind of have a closed system like that. But if you had to, you could do it out of regular taxation as well. I mean, then the people who pay most of the income taxes will pay most of the price. And you'll get rid of this regressive system.
Help me understand the permanence of Bill C-282, because as I read it seems as though once this receives royal assent, there's nothing we're going to be able to do to unwind it if there is the political willpower to do that. That seems counterintuitive to the way government works. Is it truly going to be a forever thing?
Yeah, well, make it a constitutional amendment. Sorry, Martha.
I mean, there's nothing forever in politics. It seems like that's less and less the case. A subsequent government could put another bill saying we're not going to carve anything out and, have it go through the process. My suspicion, Michael, is that it will be significantly challenged not by Canadians and not by another government. Because frankly, I'm not hearing a whole lot of politicians showing enough courage to deal with this period, because there are significant votes in Quebec and Ontario associated with dairy. It is by far, to me, and I've used this example many times, the dairy lobby is akin to the American National Rifle Association. And people stop and they say, whoa, it has nothing to do with gun violence. It has everything to do with just how much money is there and gets spent on lobbying. It is, I think, I would think, Bill, it's probably our highest spending lobby in the country. That buys you a lot. When I was doing my work, the figure was well over $100 million a year. A lot of
which is a taxpayer subsidy to to the dairy producers in addition to the quota.
Yeah,
they turn right around and use it to lobby with.
Yeah, Michael, you and Bill and I are have all been paying for that.
Yep.
But where it will be challenged is by our trading partners. The next time if there's a Trump government, that may actually ironically be the end of supply management in Canada, because they will have absolutely nothing to do with our continuing to try and protect us, and that protect that sector. The people who will be hurt by that will be the auto sector, will be the other agricultural sectors, will be anybody else in Canada who is trying to export anything, will be hurt by any future trading partner saying, sorry, but if that's not even on the table, screw you. I mean, they might be more diplomatic and more polite in saying that, but that's the message. And that might ironically force enough people in Canada to realize just how problematic protecting supply management is. And maybe at that time we'll get enough votes to say enough is enough. It's totally inappropriate to have a very small number of wealthy people in Canada jeopardize the prosperity of so many other sectors in the country.
Since we're talking about cheese so much, I do want to go back to the time of the free trade agreement with the United States and what happened to the Canadian wine industry. It's fading into the past now. Happily, not so many people remember how awful Canadian wine was before the free trade agreement with the United States. But it was legendarily undrinkable. We certainly didn't sell anything significant abroad except for maybe baby duck. And the general view by a lot of people was that if we liberalized trade with the United States, our wine industry, which was producing this terrible wine, was just going to be wiped out. That's not at all what happened. With free trade, all of a sudden, you had the full blast of competition hitting the industry, and there was some adjustment assistance from the government, which it's too bad you can't tell this kind of story more often, but the adjustment assistance, a lot of it got used to pull up the old grapevines and plant the varietals that we're now all so familiar with. And now we have a terrific wine industry, and we actually do export, and Canadians are enjoying much better wine than they were. Wine and cheese go together. We should do the same thing with cheese. And then especially at this time of year when you're enjoying your wine and cheese, you can enjoy the cheese just as much as the wine.
Well, Bill, thank you for your insight into wine and cheese today. And Martha, thank you for yours as well.
Well, thanks for having me, Bill. It's always great to have these conversations with you. Sorry about the noise in the background, but great to have had this conversation with you.
Good to have you under any circumstance. Thank you.
Bill Robson is the CEO of the C.D. Howe Institute. His letter to Canadian senators titled "Don't Let the Dairy Lobby Win This Fight" can be read on cdhowe.org. Martha Hall Findlay is the former president and CEO of the Canada West Foundation. And I think you've got a medal you can hold up and show us.
Oh, no. Okay.
And again, this is?
This is a Alberta Queen's Jubilee Medal.
Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for yours.
I'm Michael Hainsworth. Thank you for joining us.
You've been listening to the C.D. Howe Institute podcast with Michael Hainsworth. Subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. The C.D. Howe Institute is an independent, not-for-profit research institute whose mission is to raise living standards by fostering economically sound public policies. The Institute is widely considered to be Canada's most influential think tank and a trusted source of essential policy intelligence, distinguished by nonpartisan, evidence-based research and subject to definitive expert review. Visit cdhowe.org and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you.